Three, two, one.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special Passionfruit episode where we will be discussing bookkeeping with Brandie Posey. Brandie is an acclaimed comedian and the co-host of the Lady to Lady podcast and has a unique background for finance and bookkeeping for creators in the creator space. I'm joined by managing editor Drew Grant and publisher James Dell to help me with the conversation. As tax season comes along, we know it is a stressful time for creators, so we hope this information will help you with some of the ins and outs of what is basic good hygiene, as we say, for creative economy bookkeeping. As always, please like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you in the conversation.
So I see we have our first question from a guest, but I do want to say before we start any of this that Brandie and the advice we're giving today, or what we're talking about today, is not a substitute for actually getting actual financial help for your specific thing. I feel like, Brandie, if you want to put your contact info, we can promote that out afterwards if you are taking on new clients, but everyone should talk to their own financial advisor for their specific situation. We're just kind of here to talk generally about some situations that apply to creators, and I think this is a disclaimer I needed to put in the in the intro here.
For sure. Yeah. And I also just want to say too that I'm not a CPA. Like I said, I am self-taught, and what I am specialized in is I organize people's things to hand over to an accountant who does file the taxes. Mm-hmm. So I help put your stuff together for the person that actually does that, because I don't want to pay for the licensing. I don't want to learn all that. I also personally don't do payroll because I don't want to. So I know a little bit about payroll tax. And just FYI, if people that are businesses that, during the pandemic, you had people employed the entire time. By April 1st, you have the potential to get payroll tax money back through a government program right now. So if you did pay people, use your PPP loan and actually did the right thing with it, that is in place until April 1st. So look that up and you'll see it. It'll be good.
The first question that we have, and I think this is a good kind of general way to start out here, is for freelancers, would you recommend paying your taxes by quarter or all at once at tax season?
I mean, to me, I think that depends on what kind of job you're doing. Like if you have a job that is kind of, you're consistent with work throughout the year, then I think it makes sense to be paying quarterly and not get hit with a big thing. But if you have a job that, say your company is you cut firewood or whatever, so you have one part of the year that you make the most of your money, and you need that chunk to kind of help you throughout the year, basically, then I think it's you can do that in a chunk. It kind of just depends on whichever makes the most sense for you, as far as what your income flow looks like.
So let's talk a little bit. I think a lot of your clients, you said, are other comedians, and I know you have your podcast production company. So when you're setting up something like that, or you're helping out people who are doing, comedy tours or stuff like that, does that make a lot of sense to register, to have them be LLCs, to register as their own businesses, or just to put it on self-employment and just keep track of books, so you don't have to pay quarterly, I guess?
I mean, I think most people, until you're really making consistently between 75 and 100K a year, I think unfortunately staying self-employed or a sole proprietor makes sense. And you also, you don't want to become an LLC and then take it back the next year, if you aren't making that money. Because what that basically, you never want to flag the IRS with something that looks crazy different from everything else, because that's when you'll actually get their attention. So if you say, if you're making a lot of money and that's great, no problem, whatever the years, but then if you LLC and then you make good money one year, and then you don't make money, you take your LLC away, then you bring it back, that is for sure when they're going to be ooh, let's look closer at what's happening here.
Good to know.
Yeah. Mostly consistency and not blipping yourself is the name of the game for the most part, with all of that stuff. So unfortunately, I wish self-employment tax wasn't as high as it is. I mean, I struggle with this too. It makes me crazy how much money I pay in taxes compared to what I do claim as my income. And it's unfortunately that there's only so much we can do as creatives. I mean, like we aren't valued the way we should be.
Yeah.
And I think it's also why when you look at like certain, talk to your congressperson, be an annoying person to them to be like, hey, like, we can be supporting artists and things a lot more. If you're a musician right now, there's something going through Congress that Rashida Tlaib is leading that's trying to actually make streaming pay a penny per stream as opposed to the 0.0057 cents that it currently does. So if you're in that game whatsoever, like pressure your congressperson to be a part of that. So they're still going to tax us and they're still going to screw us where they can. But if you can make more money, that's, you'll do better that way.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about like the idea of like, the 1099s and like what gets sent out to people at the end of the year. And I know you're not specifically doing taxes, but I mean, I think a lot of the problem with freelance stuff in general, especially online, is like, you might not be getting a 1099. Twitch is good about sending them out. eBay, which I know is like part of the resale like community, or Depop or something like that, did a couple of years where they were just like, if you make under 600, we're not sending you anything. And then like, how do you?
That's a standard.
So how do you like track something like that?
I mean, it depends on like how in depth you want to get with your finances. Like I tell everybody, I think it's important to like, if you can have a separate bank account or at least a separate credit card that your business is, that way you know where all that stuff is. And once a month, go through your statements and say, this is what I made, this is what I spent. And you can do that on an Excel sheet. You can do that on if you don't want to get into paying the subscription fees for any of the like QuickBooks or anything like that. Like some people don't need that because I think it can be relatively easy to just be on top of the organization side of it. You should like even with my own business, I don't run any of my my invoices through QuickBooks because it gets messy because I invoice for so many different things. So I just have like a Google Doc that I have as like I have one page that is like my summary page of like, these are all the invoices I sent out. This is the date they sent out. And then this is the date they were paid. And then that one gets crossed off. And then I have like the invoice templates and different tabs after that. And that just, good.
No, I was going to say like, that's so interesting. So you can get a business bank account or something like that without registering as an LLC. You can do that as a sole proprietor. Okay.
Yeah, you should be able to. Yeah. And also, like you do want to track that stuff because at the end of the year, it's like, there's plenty of things that like, that $600 is a threshold for 1099s. So you won't get 1099 for anything under $600. That's like a standard across the board. But also like, you want to know that way when your 1099 comes in, that you're being 1099 accurately. Because I've definitely gotten 1099s that were thousands of dollars more. And you want to be able, when that comes in, to check it and be like, you need to reissue this because you don't want to claim less income than what's been reported to the government, because that's a way that you will also be flagged, basically. That doesn't mean that like, I mean, I have a lot of stuff that like doesn't get 1099. So I kind of just don't even claim most of that, but I make sure that all my 1099s and all of my like W-2s, all of that stuff, like that is accurate. And that, because that's what the government sees. And they basically say, oh, does what they're saying match what we were given? So if you're tracking your invoices throughout the year, it's like very easy just to check that stuff at the beginning of the year. And all 1099s should be sent out by the first week in February. You should have gotten everything that you were going to get.
So I guess just bringing it back to the very simple fact here. I mean, there's 1099s, there's 1099Ks versus 1099 NECs versus 1099 miscellaneous. I mean, what are the basic differences between some of those things you might be seeing?
Your NEC is relatively new. That's a few years old. And that kind of took the place of the 1099 miscellaneous for most people. Like that's most likely what you'll be getting because that's like the non-employee. That's like you as a contractor. They made that, I think 2 or 3 years ago, that kind of became its own category. Your miscellaneous and your Ks, I don't really deal with a ton of those. I think one of them is like, if like your business or like your like a rental space or like, your product, like basically like that kind of thing.
When it comes to things like, I guess less so, this might be less relevant in the comedy industry, but for stuff that you're trying to write off as deductions, let's say deductions are the things that you can claim because they're part of your job, but they don't necessarily, get taken off your payroll. So can you walk us a little bit between those like deductions that are like maybe like the medical stuff if you have, if you go through like a government program like or something like that, like our Covered California, versus the deductions you do for meals, for travel, for let's say equipment for your space?
Yeah, I mean, you as a performer, as a creator, like frankly, like, and this is just me talking, try to write all of it off that you can, like truly, because here's the thing, if you do get audited, you also want to give auditors something to find. And then, and it's like, say, like, technically, like, like you write off all of your cell phone bill, even though technically you're only using a % of your cell phone for your job or something. But if you do get audited, then they can be like, actually only 50% of this. And you're like, oh, you got me. Okay. And then they feel like they did their job, and you've done your job, and you are paying much less, basically. So they will look until they find something. But like as a performer, like anything you buy for stage, like, so any stage clothes, that doesn't mean that all your clothes can be written off. Like that's, if you just wear like a jeans and t-shirts, like you're wearing that out, that you just happen to wear it on stage, you don't want to write that off. But if you are writing off, if you are buying stuff that is like mostly for performing, like your gear, everything that is like for that space, like if you get your hair done, because if you're a front facing person, like, you can write off hair stuff. Like everything that makes this what it needs to be for this, write it off. Like, I mean, definitely. Yeah, absolutely do that.
Well, here's a very specific example. I think will speak to you a little bit, because I found this yesterday while going to the Lady to Lady TikTok. Very glad you said this wasn't the dumbest thing anyone has ever spent money on. But there were about 2 years during the pandemic where I spent several $1,000s on claw games that you would play online, that virtual claw games that you could win actual prizes to. And then I would talk about it on streams, on podcasts. I did like a lot of Pokemon live streams where I'd buy cards and rip them on stream. I never thought about maybe possibly writing some of those microtransactions off on taxes.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, that stuff's all research. That's all like for the content that you're creating, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That was my entire identity.
No, that's all absolutely. Cause that's like, that goes towards, like, you can write off your subscription services. Like, like, I mean, I rep a copywriter who writes off all of his streaming services because he like needs to be up to date on like what the shows are that's coming out to be able to talk about them, because he writes copy for promotion for stuff. So all of the streaming services, if you're subscribed to Patreons that are instructional for you, like you can absolutely write that stuff off. But like, anything that you're purchasing on camera or like bringing to camera, like as a performer, any of that stuff is absolutely, because you used it. I mean,
this was actually how I, when I was doing my Fish podcast, my favorite band in the world is Fish, and
wrote off some Fish tickets.
Wrote off some Fish tickets.
Hell
wrote
yeah,
off
you
some
did.
Hotel rooms. Wrote off some flights, and it is kind of a hack. I'm going to these Fish shows anyway, but because my creative output for it is it requires me to go engage with that stuff. I mean, I think the line I always used with people, again, not financial advice, but like, does it pass a laugh test? Like, can you look someone in the eyes and say, like, I host a podcast and I talk about this thing that I'm really passionate about. I need to do the thing in order to talk about it and create the content for it. So, if you look someone in the eyes and say it, you're probably good. If it is, I wanted to go on a cruise and I thought about my podcast while I was on the cruise, like, that's a little bit harder to say that, I was working on vacation. But if it's a fish cruise, absolutely. What else am I doing there?
Yeah. Or like I book a lot of stand-up tours around like, if I have like a friend that's getting married or something, I'll book a show in the area. That way that flight's completely, I can write off that flight. I can write off that hotel. Cause it's like, well, I'm there for work. I just happen to also be here for a wedding. So like, I try to, mix and match that stuff when I can.
I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm wondering a little bit about, I generated some income this year off of a claw game when I went to Vegas and won $1,500 doing claw game. I'll have to pay taxes on that $1,500. So maybe I should be writing off. The amount that
absolutely. Wow. Your online claw games made you better at that Vegas claw game. So that's research. That's just research. Like claw games are just research, I mean, that's all that is.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of people in like sort of the online sort of pundit space, doing like content coverage for like TV shows, movies, stuff like that. And I have a handful of clients, friends I know that work have specific branded channels, so like Star Wars or like Marvel stuff like that. And I know everyone just got their Star Wars celebration tickets yesterday. And that's going to be in Japan. That's going to be such a huge thing for them. Would it be possible for them to write off that expense then if their brand is like Star Wars coverage?
I mean, they're going to cover it, right?
Yeah.
They're going to go and they're going to, then absolutely. That's all.
Yeah.
That's absolutely.
I feel like my mind is being blown right now, and I want to go back and redo years of taxes.
It's a work conference.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is. It's the same as like, yeah.
The creativity does require you to be there for those kinds of things. If you were making a movie and you were, a studio and you had to get a bunch of, people to location, and you asked some people to book their own flights to get to location, those flights are a business expense. That you can't make a movie without those flights, and the production will want to know that, because the production would want to write that off, because that's how those things work too.
Yeah.
No, if you're somebody like me who gets very depressed by looking at the, let's say, generated income from doing some of these streams versus what you're saying we can write off on our taxes as business expensive, you're going to have a long column of microtransactions and makeup or maybe hair, not right now, but like in general, or clothing or stuff like that. And then the income, is a little bit harder, I think, for creators to like conceive of month to month. Yeah, because it's not like a consistent flow. You have to if you're on YouTube, you have to consider like super chats and Patreon subscriptions and membership subscriptions, and those things can vacillate. I mean, by definition, they will be vacillating like greatly throughout the month. So do you have any suggestions? And I imagine the same thing is kind of true for podcasting and for doing stand-up comedy. Some months you book maybe not that many paying shows, and some months you pay a lot more, or getting tips or anything like that. I mean, how do you sort of suggest looking at those things at the end of the month, or is it just sort of like more of a quarterly thing? Or
I mean, you're looking at it quarterly, like for tax purposes, you're looking at the full year. Ideally, hopefully, you're coming ahead. You hope that you're coming out on top. I think looking at things monthly is just for you to be like, ooh, okay, what can I tweak with my business to actually make it more profitable? Like that's just for you internally. There's like you versus like what the government needs to know about,
I'm very interested because I work now for Passionfruit, but I still do, reselling. I still do, performing on various podcasts. I generate some income on Patreon. And so I was wondering, there was that mixed earner thing for a while during the pandemic. I'm not sure if that's still a status right now, but like for people who, let's say, hit over a minimum threshold of how much they're making at a full-time job or like another job, but then their creative work that they want to deduct separately or like have put separately, like how would you suggest doing that? Or is there like not a way really if you have a well-paying full-time employment?
I mean, no, it's like you're also at a certain point you want to look at like, is this worth starting like having it as a separate entity at a certain point with that? I mean, and that kind of depends on like how much it's actually going to be bringing in like over time. But I think, that starts getting into talking to a tax attorney or tax accountant's category for me. I would organize and be able to tell you how much you can pay out to them. But yeah.
That does make me one of the things that I feel like I never really was taught and kind of had to figure out on my own was, and I feel like this is true for a lot of people, is what good financial like personal hygiene looks like. So like what are the things I'm supposed to be looking at monthly? What are the things that I'm supposed to be looking at quarterly? Like, what are some of the tips that you give people who, I mean, like you said, creatives, not generally math people, not generally the kind of people who are used to even having money in their bank account. And so, like, what are the things, especially if your money is coming in lumpy, like, a lot up front, then you're cold for a couple months. Like, what can you do to kind of more sustainably manage your own personal financial hygiene?
I mean, I think that a big thing is get an Excel, get a Google sheet, use a lot of colors so it doesn't feel boring. As a creative, you should see how colorful all my spreadsheets are. It's just fun. But like, look at like, what are your fixed costs that like, what do you, think there's like several tiers that you want to look at. Like, how much money do you have to have per month to live? You know, like what is your rent? What is like a minimum on groceries? Do you have a car payment, a phone payment? Like, what is that number that you're like, this I have to have, you know? And then like, what is a tier of, to make my life, you know, the way that I would like it to be? Like, what is that extra amount of money? Like, you know, how much would I like to also make sure I have for entertainment set aside every month, you know, or like to go out to eat or whatever. And then like also, you know, have like a section that's like, how much, you know, could I put, what would I love to be able to put away, basically? You know, like I use Acorns. If you've ever used Acorns, it's a nice program that like can just take $5 a month out of your account, and like no judgment if you can't do that. I literally couldn't. I just turned 40 literally last week, and like I wouldn't have been able to do that until maybe 4 years ago. Like that's how, like, it's, so there is no judgment. We're fucking creatives. We live in a country that unfortunately just like doesn't value us. So don't let that number shame you at all. But I think if you can like have those different buckets and kind of just be like, what is that number that I need to have to make sure that I'm good? And like, ideally, if you can put like $100 away or something, just a month, just to have to put it. And if you got to put it in a different bank account, put it somewhere where you're not seeing it. You know, if you can do that, just to, and then I always try to, with that money, I always try to be like, it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist, you know? And I think it's that way. If something does come, like you want to at least have like a few thousand ideally sitting aside in the case of an emergency of some kind. Cause unfortunately we're unsupported by the world we live in. So it's like, yeah.
I kind of stumbled into that backwards, which was like, I didn't understand how withholding worked. And I just knew that, you know, the first year I had to do it, I of course didn't, because you're like, oh, I got a $10,000 check, $10,000 to me. Like,
hell yeah.
Amazing. And then tax time comes and they're like, yo, you owe us 3 of that. And you're like, I don't have 3 of that. Like, what do you mean? Now we need to work something out with the government. That sucks. And so you learn the first time that they're like, we expect to take some of this. But I, of course, never actually looked to see, you know, what it's based on, how much money you make every year and what tax, you know, where's it going to fall in? And so what I did was I just created a second bank account. And I said, for every dollar that I take in, I'm just putting half of it away. And like,
that's great.
In that sense, it's kind of like I was saving for myself just because I didn't understand what I would owe the government. But it always worked out in my favor that I had saved a couple grand on top of what I had socked away over there. And that's kind of how I fell into it. And it was years later that I figured out like, oh, like you can estimate this pretty easily if you just actually keep track of it throughout the year.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, I always try to set aside about 30%, 30 to 40% of like what I make to, you know, and I say that like would be like the most hygienic version of myself. But there are also times where like I started a comedy label at the end of last year. So like what that was like, all right, well, a lot of my savings is just going to go into that. And that's just where that money is going to go. But you know, you kind of like think about that and you look at that. And also like, I just want to talk about like, I know one of the questions in the chat was like, for anyone starting an LLC for the first time, what's your biggest piece of advice? And I think it is like looking at like your fixed costs versus like your variable costs. And like your variable costs are a lot of like first time things that you're going to get like pay out of the gate, basically. Like your permits and licenses are like once a year thing for certain things, your logo design, your web build, like your incorporation fees, like any brochures, business cards you want to buy, like, you know, if you need a physical location, like a down payment for that, or like, you know, the first month's rent or whatever, any improvements you have to, like, that's all a chunk up top that you don't have to pay every year. I mean, unfortunately in California, there's like an $800 a year LLC fee. That's a nightmare, but whatever, we live, it's sunny every day. And like, so I think just knowing what that amount of money is before you're starting an LLC, and then look at like what your fixed costs would be like every month, and just kind of like projecting that, knowing that you can write off those losses for that first year or two as well. You know, like if you're like, I'm definitely going to be under for the first year of my label, and like, that's fine. Great. I don't want to pay taxes. You know, so it's just being aware of that and kind of like thinking long term, like thinking like, okay, by this first year, the goal is to have XYZ done. By 5 years, what do I have? Because once you've actually LLC'd, you do want to be thinking more long term at that point.
So as somebody who now has you say a label, but you're still doing comedy and you're still bringing in various income sources, but one of them is a job or a position where you, I'm assuming, like send out payments and invoices, and like you might not do that yourself, but like how do you separate those businesses, in terms of your bookkeeping, like something where you are, founder and, versus something where you are like just self-employed, I guess?
Well, so the way that I kind of think of myself as like 3 separate entities, basically. Like the label is an LLC that is its own thing and that has its own book separately, because that entity is going to be 1099ing out to all of my artists, and like that is its own separate thing. So I'm not mixing that with my money whatsoever. And then me personally, like my stand-up income, my personal residual income all comes to me personally. Like I'm still just a sole proprietor for that. And then Lady to Lady, my podcast, exists as a general partnership. Like the 3 of us have like a deal that basically we have our own bank account, and like I do the books for that, and like that money goes through there. And then at the end of the year, we're partners. So all that, like the income for that bank account basically gets split between the 3 of us on taxes, like saying, oh, we each made a third of what the podcast made, and we get a thing called a K1 basically. And then I report that through my personal taxes. So
one thing I always think about, and this is a scene from Everything Everywhere All at Once, where they're I've never seen that movie, but it's when they're in Jamie Lee Curtis's the tax person's office, and they're trying to talk about whether or not the main character buying a karaoke machine for her laundromat counts as a business or a hobby. And I think that's something I keep going back to, especially now that I've gone from full-time creator, like I said, to having a job, but still the job is talking to creators. It still involves being a creator in some respects. Still involves, doing different kinds of creative work, of which I do get paid, but it's maybe just not something that is I'm devoting all my time to. So like, how do you determine like the business versus hobby? I
mean, I think it's like what James is talking about with like that kind of laugh test, I think is worth doing. I also think that like, if you file your taxes every year, you're not going to raise a flag on yourself either. Like in that movie specifically, it's like she hadn't filed for a long time. And it's like, so that's going to make them, the evil eye of the IRS will find you and be like, ooh, you haven't filed for a while. What's happening over there? We'd like to see more of that, please. So I think that like, it's just kind of, so like one karaoke machine in the midst of everything that you've been filing consistently and like you've been paying your taxes, no problem. Like every year, they're not going to give a shit or come find that. But like if you've been paid for like 5 years and then they come and look and then they're like, well, okay, well, this is not.
Or the story I've heard is like, if you, a hobby, a business is something that you do hope to make money off of.
Yes.
And so, if all you have are expenses and all you're doing is going to fish concerts and you haven't produced anything and you haven't made a cent, year one, there are startup costs. It takes time to make money. There's like a leeway period of probably, maybe 2 years, 3 years even, where you can lose money at a business. If you never make a cent in 3 years and all you're doing is writing off expenses for a business that you're never going to launch, that I would say is also the other, like, I've heard that can get you flagged for having a hobby
for sure
business.
Well, yeah, because it is like, all right, like, what do you like, show me that you actually tried to make money. It's fine if you didn't, that's fine. But like, how did you try? Did you, did you start a podcast? Like, where are those fees to go with it? Like, if you just bought a karaoke machine, but there's no like, a website to go with your karaoke business, or like you didn't pay for Instagram app, like anything to kind of round out that story for them a little bit more.
I think one of the things that people shouldn't need to know about, which I definitely didn't, was that there is the difference in like itemized deductions versus taking the standard deductions when it comes to tax stuff. I think like we say the impulse, I think, for being a creator is to do the itemized deductions because you probably deduct a lot more. But for year over year, because of what you're saying, you do want to eventually show a profit. Is it maybe more prudent to just take standard, or is there no such thing as standard when you're talking about like kind of industry of a creator?
No, creative? I mean, it kind of depends. I mean, because like the standard is decent sometimes too, depending on how much you're actually bringing in and how much you are legitimately spending. Like if you are legitimately spending like a ton more than the standard, then yeah, you should absolutely claim that. But if sometimes if I'm under the standard, I just claim the standard because I'm like, well, that's the minimum. Like that's fine. And a lot of the times I've had years where I definitely haven't hit it either. And I'm like, great, well, I got more written off than I would have otherwise. But I think it kind of just depends on like where you're at with those two things.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm always like, okay, so I can write off a part of the room. Now, I think now that I have a full-time job, I can no longer do that, even if like I'm still doing a creator work in here and making some money doing that, because I have also a full-time job that I do in here as well that can no longer write off this space. But like it became very, very, again, this is getting really into the tax weeds of it, but it became very, very like difficult during the pandemic when they opened everything up kind of for the first time to write off, like you can write off parts of your home, whereas before that was like really verboten, unless you said this was absolutely just dedicated for work only, or a certain kind of work. We had another question from Andres here about what is your thoughts on California's AB 5 laws, which I'm not even sure what that is. So
this is what really messed up a lot of sorry, I haven't, it's never affected any of my people, so I kind of forget the name of it. But this was like if you were a freelance writer, it was a bad, stupid law, and it should be repealed. Because like if you were a freelance writer, it like limited, and maybe check me on this, but I know it like limited the amount that you could write or something for that. It really messed up.
Right? It started because of Uber, I believe. Right?
Yeah, I think it was supposed to be. I mean, it's all these. Yeah, it's bad. It should be repealed. Vote progressives into office to reverse it.
I mean, I will say, as somebody who works in California, but also hires, tries to hire a lot of California freelancers. There's like a cap on how many hours we can have them working or how much we can have them do per month because of this California law. Or like before having to qualify them as part-time or full-time writers. And so it becomes very hard when you manage a sample of freelancers. The California is this one exception state that exists outside of everything else, where you can't just bring people on to do a certain amount of work,
Well, it's like freelance writers. It's like you work for 20 different outlets, and you're constantly have like different pitches at all these different places. And it's like, it's just, there's several problems that need to be fixed in that whole situation. It's like, you need to be able to just hire people in a freelance way. You also need to be able to pay people quickly and timely. I know that's like a massive problem, within a lot of my writer friends have had, outstanding shit for 6 months and stuff here and there. And it's like, that's its own, that's its own.
I think that's really interesting. And especially as we go into the creator, when we talk about more like the creator space, like, things like there is no sick days for being a creator online. There's no time off. There's no 401k. There's no retirement plan. There's no medical health. Like you have to take on all these burdens yourself. And of course, it's not really fair to say platforms should pay for that for anyone who wants to use their service. But like there is, it feels like there has to be like some way that you can then write it off your taxes because you're paying your own health insurance. You're working, like you said, if you're a freelance writer, you're working for a million different outlets, none of whom have to treat you like you are employed or anything. So it really, the burden is really on the creators. And I think this, has always been a thing for freelance writers, and for, actors have SAG and screenwriters have Writers Guild. But there is no real sense of that for what online content creators can do. And they don't know necessarily that maybe their medical stuff can be written off or that they should get an HSA, which I think you can get through the state programs.
So,
Yeah. And I was reading that's like a triple write-off because you don't get taxed on the money that you use for it. You don't get taxed, or it gains interest, and then you don't get taxed during tax time for anything that you spent on it. So
if you can, Biomedical, bless it. Bless Medical. I was on it for like a decade. Like I honestly also think that like because it's a not-for-profit system, I think that you get better care actually, because you're dealing with a lot of teaching hospitals who are going to want to run more tests and things like that than somebody that's just like, okay, cool, I got to do, like, I have a friend that had a hysterectomy a few years ago, and she did it through Medi-Cal, and she had another friend that did it through her private insurance. And the Medi-Cal, they did more tests, and they were able to do a much less invasive version because they wanted to show students how to do that, versus a doctor who was like, I can do this one faster. I have like 5 of them today because I have my bills I'm paying. Like, I'm in charge of my practice. So like, and the friend that got the private hysterectomy, she has a much bigger scar, and her healing took a lot longer.
Wow.
So like, just because it's Medi-Cal does not mean that you're not getting a good quality of care. Like, I'm a big preacher of that. It's like a great, amazing system. That I wish was available to literally everybody.
Yeah. I think advocating is one of these things that, like, again, going back a little bit to the creator space and going back to just figuring out anything about finances. I think advocating for yourself is one of these hard spaces, especially if you're very young, especially if this is the first time you're doing taxes, which it's going to be so many people. I don't know if they changed the tax law recently, or they made some decisions this year, or I think maybe going into effect next year. Again, let's fact check this, but where they didn't seem to care about TikTok, how much money you were making on TikTok or Instagram Reels, or unless you were making like a huge amount, unless you were one of the the top Mr. Beast earners. They were really kind of just letting that slide, and now they've hired 85,000 new IRS agents to specifically kind of look at these kind of things and go, okay, well, you made $100,000 this year. You owe us, at least 30 or like 15 or something like that. If you're an 18-year-old, you might not have any idea what that looks like, how to do any of these forms. I mean, what would you suggest? Let's say it's the end of the year and you haven't been keeping your books that well, like, and it's tax time. You just found out about it. Like, do you have any suggestions, even if it's just hiring somebody that is good at doing this, about how to,
I think if you are a business, like you need 3 good people in your corner. You need a good attorney, you need a good accountant, and you need a good insurance person. And I think those, to make sure that you're covered and whatnot with like your various, depending on who you hire or whatever. But I think finding an accountant that works, if you haven't done anything, I think somebody that like can set you up the right way for the first year and then show you, okay, this is what you need to do going forward. I think you kind of like, if like, you're up against the line right now, you just, unfortunately that's the lesson you're going to learn the first time through, I think.
Well, and as someone who knows people who has unfortunately had to, learn and live that lesson, I think there's the IRS is not very quick at catching these things. And so there's certainly a sense that you can just hide. And I can tell you that like, they'll get to it. It might take them a year or two even to figure out that you didn't pay taxes that year. From what I have heard, again, not financial advice at all, but it's far better to go to the IRS and say, hey, I can't pay this. I fucked up. I owe you $10,000. There is no $10,000. I would like to pay you. I intend to pay you. They will hear those cases, and they, in some instances, will set up payment plans where you just, you kind of every month you send them another check. They can take it out of next year's taxes, so you could save more money this year and then just pay them back for what you owe plus interest next year. They will work with you, and I think the impulse is to be like, well, I'm just going to hide until this sorts itself out. But in fact, it's far better to go to them hat in hand and just say, I did my taxes. I can't pay you right now, but like, can we work something out?
Yeah. So they do payment plans like relatively, often with people too, because for this very reason, like usually something that I do is I'll like do like I won't even fully file in April, and I'll be like, okay, this is how much I owe. And then I'll push to October. And then I say, okay, I've got now till October to get that amount together, basically.
I think if you live anywhere in California counts as a disaster zone. Like I keep getting these notices being like, you are technically maybe in a disaster zone. You have until October. And I'm like, oh man, I thought it was March. Jeez. That's why I wanted to book the show right away. Because I thought that taxes are due in March. Oh man.
Okay. Well,
April 15th is when taxes are due, in case anyone didn't know that. Or did they move it to the 17th? I feel like it was the 17th for a couple of years.
It depends on what day of the week it falls on. Like actually this year,
I think it's a Monday.
It's a Monday, so they're due on the actual 15th.
Yeah.
So if you have,
that's when they're due, but you can file an extension. You are technically, my understanding, not financial advice.
Yeah.
You are technically supposed to pay your taxes in full, even if you file an extension. Like you're supposed to make that guess and pay them. The penalties for not doing so are
very little,
tens of dollars. Like it's pretty, if you just don't have the time to figure it out right now, far better to file an extension that just says it's coming, do that by April 15th, and then spend April to October figuring out your shit and getting the money together.
So I think for a lot of people who are starting out in content creation, they probably also have like a quote unquote, like full-time job, and this is their thing that they're trying to start up. In which case, like what would be the time where they should start thinking, okay, this is no longer, I know we kind of discussed this several ways, but like if you have you're doing Uber, you're doing, you're a waiter, you're doing whatever thing on the side, or you're temping, but you really want to focus on making content online or becoming a stand-up comedian. At what point do you just say, this is my, is there a threshold of minimum income? I think you said a little bit earlier, it should be like something around 75 to 100, but like when do you need to start taking that seriously as a business expense?
Well, so that was just for becoming an LLC. I think just to start an LLC, I think like that's an amount that kind of makes it worth it. But that's also like, check me on that too.
Okay.
Like it kind of depends differently per kind of business and stuff too, but that's like kind of what I've always heard is like the minimum. But I mean, as far as like that question, honestly, I mean, it doesn't make you less of a creator if you have other gigs whatsoever to pay your bills. Like I'm a big believer, and like I do not think that being a starving artist makes you productive. Like the financial anxiety that comes with not knowing how your bills are getting paid, I think is does not help your creativity, does not like gets in the way of you actually being able to be worried about stuff. Because you don't want to go like have a meeting with somebody like that you want it to be like a mentor, and then you're like, oh fuck, can I even pay for our coffees? Like you don't like, or whatever it is. Like, and I've been in that position where it's just you're terrified. Like I drove for Lyft up until the pandemic because I knew I wanted to have in my back pocket at any moment, like, fuck, okay, I don't want to have to take a gig at this like horrible casino in Alabama or whatever. So I would just rather drive this weekend and just do that instead. Like, I mean, I think that like we're allowed to choose our own paths, and like grind culture is toxic, and we should get that out of our heads of like, you also like your art, whether or not you make money off of it or not is one thing, but like, it doesn't make it any less if that is not the full way that you make your income. Like, I think it's like perfectly fine to spin several plates. And if that gives you the room to like not have to compromise in the thing that is your actual passion.
That's the pull quote right there. I think that's a good way of putting it. I think that one of the things I do want to ask, again, you don't do tax preparation, but like, do you have advice for people? I think the issue I'm hearing coming up over and over again is, well, a lot of tax professionals just don't understand the way that like OnlyFans income versus, Instagram reel programs versus Instagram creativity program. Like they're just not understanding this sort, like traditional CPAs or traditional tax accountants just don't understand the way the web works. And I know that you mostly, but mostly having a comedy background of helping people, but also other kinds of creatives, including podcasters. I mean, do you have any advice or sort of sense of like where to send people, or if there's any sort of like good service to use for that kind of?
I think it's like you want to find entertainment accountants. If you just Google that, a lot of people will do that kind of thing. Younger accountants that will understand the web, then be a little bit more literate in what you're talking about, of which there's definitely plenty. I mean, I think it's like, it seems like a daunting new space, but it's like the principles are still the same as it ever was with a lot of stuff. It's like it's a new online web frontier, but like an OnlyFans artist is an actor, their income is just coming from a different place, and actors have been having to pay taxes for forever. It's just, it's the same principles applied to different things.
Yeah, it's almost like almost to like restaurant work, because you're getting it through tips. It's not like you're getting it through a production studio. You're getting it through fan tips. Same with Patreon, although they have like a really good system for setting that up. But like, yeah, you can like have, I think, taxes taken out possibly in Patreon, like ahead of time. Like you can have them withheld.
Yeah, you can. You can have them withheld. I think anybody that's starting something new, I would say if you can have them withhold anything, and then keep your side hustle going. And then that way, that first year, if you get money back, cool, but you'll be able to see you'll be able to have an understanding of like, okay, cool, that's how much that's the percentage they're taking out of my stuff. Because that way, and if you get money back, cool. Like, I think that would be, if you were starting something, I think that would be a safe way to make sure that you aren't going to get like boned by a massive, tax bill at the end of the year.
One other thought is, I did not know that you could not have an LLC but have a business bank account. Like you can just I guess I know that sounds like it's very specific to any situation, but you can just go to a bank or can one. You
do need to have like the business. You do need like an EIN number, but you can get that for a general partnership, or like you just need a business account number. It doesn't need to be an LLC number. But you can get an EIN without having to fully incorporate.
Okay. Well, now I feel silly because I definitely thought I needed to get an EIN, not to get a business bank account, although I probably should have after getting the EIN, but I also got scammed. If you just Google how to do LLC, like how to make an LLC, got scammed twice by the first two Google results.
The scams are real, I think, unfortunately, like don't never click a sponsored link on Google. This is just like even beyond just bookkeeping and shit, but like go get past the sponsored links. Honestly, go to like the second page. Like I also like, I'm trying to figure out a search engine that I like. Google is just full of scams right now in a way that like there's this whole restaurant scam that's been happening where like they have been buying and skinning the websites of different restaurants, and like they'll be the first result, and you buy food through that restaurant. And then through that website, it never actually goes to the restaurant, and they just got your credit card number. Like that. Yeah. That's happened to like 3 different friends of mine.
But
go make sure that you're like going down a little bit. Like don't those first couple. It's unfortunately like I wish anybody was with power gave a shit. It would be nice.
They can even understand what these issues are, which is really the we have people legislating this stuff that. They don't use it. They don't understand it. It's not their reality in any way, shape, or form. So
that's why Google's search is currently giving us such a headache as publishers, is because they're changing everything around, because they're like, you're like trying. There's 3 different types of ways that people have been gaming search results, and they're trying to like lock that down. But in doing so, they're like netting up a lot of actual like just best SEO practices. That's a whole other conversation.
Google's freaking out because TikTok is their people are searching more on TikTok than they are on Google these days. And I was talking with someone earlier who actually there was a great Sam Biddle piece in The Intercept about how it is mostly Peter Thiel, Facebook, Meta, Google, Amazon. I mean, name an American tech company. They are funding the lobbyists that are creating this TikTok ban because they know that their product is not as good as what TikTok is. And they are the reason that TikTok is getting a lot of pressure from Congress right now.
That's really funny. Because I was just saying, like, I was thinking Tax Talk has been the most helpful thing in terms of, I feel like, finding out creator news or like for creators who are interested in, again, this does not substitute for financial advice, but in terms of just leading you in the right direction, or possibly like, having someone share their experience that applies to what you're going through. It's not like Googling like taxes for creators is going to net you a sort of overall view of what needs to happen, Tax Talk might.
Well, and also if you Google that, like you're just going to get like people services that are like, oh, hire me to do that. I'll just do it for you, which is just, well, that's their job too. But yeah. I mean, Tax Talk, there's great stuff. There's great, there's good YouTube people that are trying to be helpful and putting their stuff out there. I mean, it's, the more that you can demystify this world for yourself, the less anxiety it'll give you. And I think the less anxiety you have in your life, the more free you are to actually pursue your creative passions.
We're pretty much at time, but do you have any like just trusted either creators that you think do this well, or channels or places people can go that you think like are worth sharing? And if you don't know them off the top of your head, maybe you could just send them to us and we could send them around. But
yeah, I can send a few. I mean, I honestly don't really watch that many because I kind of like know
it's
know
kinda,
stuff, but
it's your own world already.
Well,
yeah,
maybe
I also
people are
like
interested in hiring you. Like, how do I, or if they're relevant there.
yeah, I'll give you guys my email address, and like you're more than welcome to reach out. Like I'm always bringing people on, kind of depending on how much work you would need from me. But yeah, and there's also people that I'm always down to like teach you how to do it too, because it's like I, at least as a creative, that's most of what I do is creative work. I do find something kind of soothing about like there is no answer except this is how much you made, this is how much you spent. Like there is something about like those concrete numbers that I do find like very validating and very calming. That's the nerdiest thing I could ever say, is like numbers are calming to me sometimes.
But
left
like side coming out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when your right side is just this like ephemeral, like, I don't know, I'm going to write a bit about blah, 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 blah. And then you're like, no, I like, to break this down. And it's like, honestly, I mean, just like to learn how to do this stuff for yourself, you're going to save yourself a lot of money over time. It's like our podcast, like I've run it like a business from day one. Like I know I have other friends who started shows around the same time, and they would just take their money and just split it 3 ways with no savings account, like no plan for anything. And it's like, we because of be able to plan from the beginning, like we have a social person, we have a producer that we pay for, like we can do like one like tour that we pay for completely out of pocket already without needing to worry about what we make on it. Like, so it's like, if you understand and you can actually do a lot of that stuff yourself, like, and you're interested, it doesn't stress you out more than less, then I mean, I'm a proponent, and like if you're creative, you're probably smart. You can do, I promise you can do this. I've met some accountants I bet are the dullest people I've ever met. Truly. The number of clients I've met that when I walk up to a meeting, the first time I used to have like purple, like a purple faux hawk, and I would just roll up and people would be like, "You're a bookkeeper?" You're like, "Yeah." You could be too, man. It's not, it's just learning how to like, it's just being detail oriented more than math. Like you don't have to know trigonometry. Algebra 2 is as far as I went. Whatever.
If there was a good hashtag for like bookkeeping talk, I would totally like learn from you. I would totally take like a class from you about how to do this kind of stuff, because I think it's such a knowledge, education skills are just like such a knowledge thing that I think we are in a dearth of. And if you're a creative who also like you have a specialty that can be transmitting that knowledge, it's really like worth its weight in gold, Yeah.
And you as a creative, you're a small business owner. This is something I yell at comedians at all the time. I'm just like, you're a small business owner. You run a business. I know that doesn't sound fun and sexy, but you are a business owner. And if your business will succeed, you just have to like have a little bit of self-discipline around certain elements of it, and that's what separates those that rise, those from fall.
I just want to say, like again, bars. Like this is a big thing that I think we really I've been banging the horn on for creatives or creators over in Passionfruit, which is like, I think you get a lot more success when you look at what the work you do online as a small business, whether or not you're an LLC, because then when a bunch of small businesses go to YouTube and say, we want some changes, that hits a little different than when a bunch of creators individually go to YouTube and say, we've all want to do, collective bargaining or something like that, which might not, there's been attempts at that might not work out. But I think when it's something that appears more like a Better Business Association or like a collective group of small businesses, even if they are just independent creators, it comes off as a lot more legitimate. And there's a lot more ways that I think these companies understand doing, like working and playing ball with those kind of companies. Absolutely.
Well, you look at like UMAL, like United Musicians AW, I forget what it is. They're the ones that are pushing this bill through with Rashida Tlaib, and like that is like a basically unionized musicians, or like the attempt to do so, basically to work for all of us. And like it's important that like we need to be banding together to like get our voices heard as much as possible. And I think that like just yeah, like no one's going to advocate for yourself creatively, and no one's going to advocate for you on like the financial side. And it's like, you know, it's you take yourself seriously in every other part of your business, like your creative side. So take yourself seriously with your money too.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a really interesting, it was a conversation I was having with Taylor Lorenz for her podcast where we were talking about, you know, is it possible to do a creator union? And she was basically like, I don't, you know, maybe down the road eventually, but it's not going to happen like in our lifetime, or maybe like very, you know, within. But she was like, but we were talking about it, and I was like, yeah, but businesses, like people, you know, platforms, everyone takes a group of collected businesses who do a lot of business on a platform seriously, and you just need to like understand and work as if you're a business. And she was saying that, like, you know, Mr. Beast employees, as we now know from like the big profile, they're like friends of friends, and he doesn't classify them as employees. And it's almost like it's hard to be taken seriously by platforms or anyone else you're trying to make changes for, when you're not treating people that are doing work for you as actual work. Like if you, it kind of has to start from like the creator understanding that the people that do work for them they're like contracting work, and that it needs to be set up like a business. And so as much as you need to take your like self, like have enough faith in yourself that you're a small business, you also need to do the diligence of, you know, making sure everyone gets paid for the work that they're doing for you. It's not just fan stuff, you know?
Yeah. If we could all banish scarcity mindset, I think it would go a long way. And that means also that, like, you know, be friends with and like, you know, be colleagues. I mean, I call other stand-ups colleagues, and they just go, ugh. And I'm like, no, sorry, you're my colleague, dude. Like, that's just deal with it. That's weird. If this is a job, which it is, then we take it seriously, and you're my colleague. And like, you know, you should know them. You should know what their business is. You should share opportunities with each other. Like, I'm a big fan, and like abundance means shit will come back to you. And like, it just will, you know, because people will see through that. People see you're confident in the work that you're putting out, and they're like, oh, that's who I want to associate with, for sure.
Oh, that's, I feel like you're just saying all the things I want you to hear. I promise that I haven't just been posting in the chat everything that I believe, and having Brandie do it out loud.
Pretty big leftist bookkeeper. Who knew?
Labor is labor.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, you were saying?
No, I was just saying fuck capitalism. Nothing major. Yeah.
I think we can round it out with a fuck capitalism. I mean, across the board. Like, you know, guys, maybe, you know, give it a year or two. We might not be paying taxes at all.
Yeah, hey, who knows?
Start saving your tires for the eventual outfits you'll have to make out of them. I think
the water wars are coming.
Yeah.
Can I write off my go bag if I'm going to become like
just put content around it?
Yeah, exactly. Put it up on screen once, and you'll be fine.
I mean, I'll start doing some stuff for 15C about sustainability. We have one final question for Gallagher from Andres asking, what would you look for when trying to find an accountant to take you on if for a creator? Or
I think number one, see if they, like, you know, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and I think just see if like they have worked with creatives before, like if they be like, all right, I would say some of your more like your bigger questions about things you can write off. You're like, okay, cool. So these are things that like I view as expenses. How do you feel about that? Like, if they go with you on that, then they're probably the right person. You know, as long as you feel respected by them, honestly, like you can vibe check out an accountant.
Awesome.
You know, yeah. Go with somebody smaller. You know, honestly, like there's good ones that are, you know, doing good work out there.
Probably in your state, right? I didn't even bring this up, but like state and local taxes are completely
Yeah. You want somebody in your state. I mean, ask people that do what you do for work if they recommend people. Like, I mean, there's a few accountants in California that I know that like rep most of the stand-up comedians because they're just like, okay, cool, you know how this works. All right, cool. And that person also just loves hanging out with comics, so it's like, you know, that's great.
Perfect, win-win. Well, Brandie, thank you for joining us. This has been so enlightening, so helpful. Where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about you, or just listening to you? Or
I am I'm at Brandazzle on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Brandazzle is here on TikTok. My podcast is called Lady to Lady. I have an album out called Opinion Cave, and my second one, Father's Milk, will be coming out in like 2 or 3 months. And my comedy label is called Burn This Records. which you can follow on Instagram, because we're burning this all to the ground.
By the way, I was listening to Opinion Cave last night, and I forgot about the fact that you were from really near Maryland, where I grew up.
Yeah.
So like a lot of this stuff was hitting like so hard. I was like, kind of like Annapolis. Yeah, it is kind of like that. It'd be like that, and
it'd be like that sometimes, though.
Yeah, and I think we're around the same age, so like a lot of the stuff, I was like, this all tracks for me. This is very much my vibe. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to be putting some of this out on clips on YouTube. So you'll be able to see some of this on socials. You can find us at Passionfruit for Us. That's a for us on, I think, most of our socials, except for YouTube, which is Passionfruit Creators, I believe. Also check us out. I love saying this out loud. Our website is passionfru.it. It makes sense, like when you think about it, it's just the fruit, but there's a dot between the U and the I. Like we're like an IT company, but we're not. We are a creator labor news outlet and community space and advocacy organization that is really working to make this creator labor movement really happen. So we are going to be launching a Patreon soon. If you're in this Discord, this is a little bit of a taste of what's to come. We will be offering like full-time memberships via Patreon probably in the next month or so. And we do weekly hangouts. We are going to be, having a lot of opportunities to take classes, to mentor, to learn from other creators, and just find people to connect with to have this space available, because I think it's something that's really needed as we talk about like this new field of Wild West internet content creation. So thank you so much for joining us, Brandie. You can find me at Video Drew. That's my personal handle. Eric or James, you want to give off where you can find you?
Don't find me on the internet. Find me at Passionfruit or downthepipes.co.
Yeah.
But otherwise, don't go looking for me too hard.
Don't do it.
Yeah, I'm at Eric Chronic across all social media. I'm also the host of the Reactiverse podcast on Passionfruit YouTube channel, so find me there every Monday.
And Crossing the Streams too, which has been the Reactiverse. The meta reactor thing that's been doing so good for us. Reactiverse has been so informative for me, just for learning a lot about how the internet works, even just from this small niche group of people who do reaction to content, like video content. It's been fascinating. We've also have a show, Deep Linkers, which we're going to get back on pretty soon, which is exploring people who do video essays on the weirdest parts of the internet. And how they, like study and love their niches and how they make a business out of doing so. So check that out. And thank you guys so much for joining us. We have hangouts every Friday afternoon around this time on Discord. So hope to see you guys there soon. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
3, 2, 1.